this type of sexual behavior is what lands you here.
No, I mean, I know I made mistakes, Your Honor, but I don't consider my son a mistake.
Javion was born, he had 4 possible fathers. Help you find your son's father and heal your broken heart.
I mean, Your Honor, as a child, I had a very bad childhood in 13 different foster homes. I've been to 4 different group homes. Well, practically a hoe of myself when I was of that age.
She told you you weren't.
Yes, I asked if I could be the father and she told me no, Your Honor.
There are 4 potential fathers, and each of the individual men I actually met on a chat line. Potential father number 4, Your Honor, he was a one-night stand. I don't remember his name.
Having this experience that you voluntarily participated in, you're not feeling too good about yourself.
In Judge Lauren Lake's courtroom, the atmosphere begins with a heavy sense of unfinished stories, unresolved mistakes, and the complicated relationship between law and justice. Her court often becomes a place where personal histories collide with legal standards, where human regret meets the strict rules of evidence, and where a single DNA test can redefine an entire generation's future. In this particular matter, the courtroom fills with 2 individuals who never imagined that their brief, imperfect choices would lead them to a public examination of truth. Their uncertainty and emotional fatigue sit beside them like uninvited companions, while Judge Lauren Lake prepares to sort through the chaos with her signature clarity and precision. The woman, Miss Davis, arrives with a childhood full of instability and wounds from growing up without a father. She speaks from a life shaped by foster homes, fragmented attachments, and the ache of not knowing who she truly belonged to. The man, Mr. Smith, enters the courtroom trying to balance defensive skepticism with an unexpected fear of responsibility. Both step forward carrying conflicting emotions: regret, duty, fear, resentment, and hope. And both seek clarity that only evidence can provide. Judge Lauren Lake, as always, brings structure to the emotional storm. She reminds both parties that truth must be approached with discipline, not avoidance. In her court, the evidence stage in divorce cases, custody cases, or paternity actions is not just a procedural checkpoint. It is the anchor point from which she draws her rulings. She treats this paternity case with the same weight she would give to major legal matters discussed on the Game-Changing Attorney podcast or topics like adverse inference in the Evidence Act. She believes in the concept of justice in jurisprudence, which means truth must be uncovered, even if it is uncomfortable, humiliating, or heartbreaking. From the very beginning, Judge Lake sets the tone. This is not a spectacle. It is a legal process where consequences are real, relationships are tested, and the future of a child is at stake. She listens closely as Miss Davis explains the sequence of events, her relationships overlapping within days, her encounters with multiple men, and her struggle to reconstruct a timeline that could point to one definite father. Her explanation is full of remorse, not only for her behavior, but for the ripple effect it has created in her child's life. She confesses that her own history of instability influenced the choices she made. The courtroom, often full of judgmental murmurs, becomes momentarily quiet because her pain speaks louder than the facts themselves. Judge Lake absorbs the testimony with her usual balance of empathy and firmness. She has seen countless people come to her courtroom seeking closure, and many, like the guests on Celebrate Recovery testimonies or adoption stories full episodes, arrive hopping to rewrite their future by confronting their past. Miss Davis's situation is no different. She wants healing, but healing cannot begin until the truth does. Mr. Smith, however, views the situation through a different lens. He argues that Miss Davis explicitly told him he was not the father, and that her own uncertainty created a web of confusion. He doubts the possibility that he is the biological parent, not only because of her inconsistent statements, but also because he met her in a casual and temporary context. He describes their connection as a brief holiday fling, a week spent together without deeper emotional ties. In his mind, the probability of him being chosen as the father out of several candidates appears more like a strategy of elimination rather than genuine belief. Judge Lake listens without interruption, noting how often men and women enter her court with narratives driven by fear rather than fact. It mirrors stories she often discusses in her podcast appearances and her broader discussions about DNA test cheating stories, mistaken assumptions, and the emotional aftermath of impulsive decisions. She reminds Mr. Smith that doubt is understandable, but evidence, not self-protection, will determine the truth today. The courtroom's attention shifts to the calendar Miss Davis created, marking each encounter with different men in specific colors. The timeline is tight, and the overlap significant. Judge Lake examines the calendar with professional scrutiny, acknowledging how such proximity of dates makes natural conception analysis complicated. She addresses the reality that the law must work with facts, not guesses, and that DNA testing, as a scientific tool, has become the backbone of modern family law. This is where so many people regret taking such tests, not because the science is flawed, but because the truth forces them to confront painful consequences. Judge Lake highlights that in paternity cases, the truth is not optional, it is foundational. The courtroom tension grows as both parties admit that communication between them was unreliable. Miss Davis acknowledges the difficulty of reaching Mr. Smith due to his inconsistent responses, but Mr. Smith counters by claiming he was always reachable and that she could have contacted him directly. Judge Lake steps in, pointing out that neither of them truly prioritized clarity for the child's sake. She stresses that parenting responsibilities cannot be suspended simply because adults are uncomfortable or unprepared. This statement reflects her ongoing commitment to reinforcing the relationship between law and justice. Legal obligations often exist to counterbalance emotional avoidance. Throughout the testimony, Judge Lake maintains focus on the central issue. There is a 2-year-old child whose future depends on the truth. Regardless of how messy the relationships were, how imperfect the choices, or how painful the memories, the facts must rise to the surface. The courtroom becomes a mirror reflecting both parties' insecurities, but Judge Lake ensures that neither shame nor conflict will overshadow the child's right to identity. Miss Davis expresses with increasing emotion that she does not consider her son a mistake. Instead, she views him as her chance to break generational patterns. Her voice trembles as she shares her desire to give her child stability, something she never received in her own upbringing. The courtroom silently acknowledges the weight of her confession. Even Mr. Smith, who initially stood distant and defensive, begins to show glimpses of vulnerability. He speaks about losing his own father at a young age, revealing that he knows the emptiness of growing up without paternal guidance. Judge Lake listens with empathy, yet firmly reminds him that emotional connection to his past does not exempt him from responsibility if the DNA test confirms paternity. The conversation continues, touching on the legal implications of listing a father on a birth certificate, the importance of consistent parental involvement, and the influence child support rulings can have on families. Issues that echo real cases discussed in Supreme Court, child support opinions, and legal education programs such as the Divorce Course podcast. Judge Lauren Lake draws from her deep legal experience to inform both parties that today is not about blame. It is about identity, accountability, and the protection of a child's future. Miss Davis, however, prepares herself for any outcome, including the possibility that Mr. Smith may not be the father. She recognizes the emotional difficulty of navigating the truth, but insists that she has always wanted to identify her son's biological father. She explains that she eliminated 2 other potential fathers through earlier DNA tests, and that her assumption about Mr. Smith was not random. It was based on timing. But she acknowledges the unanswered gap, potential father number 4, whose name she cannot even remember. Judge Lake questions her thoroughly on this point, because the absence of information makes the legal process harder. Miss Davis admits that she only knows the man lived in Columbus, and that their interaction was brief and entirely forgettable. Judge Lake expresses disappointment, emphasizing again the significance of intentional decision-making when the outcome affects a child's lifelong identity. As the testimonies unfold, the courtroom becomes a quiet crossroads between past mistakes and future possibilities. Judge Lauren Lake prepares to deliver the final step, reading the DNA test results. The court waits, holding its collective breath, knowing that the outcome will shift the emotional and legal landscape for everyone involved. Judge Lauren Lake stands at the center of the courtroom with the same unwavering focus she brings to every case. For her, truth is not a luxury, it is a legal necessity. As she prepares to read the DNA results, the courtroom falls into a silence heavy enough to feel like gravity. Years of legal experience have shown her that this moment, the moment before truth is spoken, is often where people experience the most intense confrontation with themselves. Every regret, every assumption, every excuse becomes irrelevant once scientific evidence enters the equation. This case is no exception. Miss Davis and Mr. Smith both stand emotionally exposed, fully aware that whatever Judge Lake reads from that envelope will determine the direction of their lives. The presence of DNA evidence has transformed modern law, eliminating the ambiguity that often created generational emotional trauma. This is why the modern relationship between law and justice has become increasingly intertwined with scientific truth. And yet, despite the power of DNA results, people still fear them. Many people regret taking such tests because truth, when it arrives, does not negotiate or soften itself. It simply alters everything. Judge Lake knows this. She understands that when she reads these results, someone's identity might collapse, someone's hope might shatter, and someone else's future might finally find clarity. It is the reason she approaches paternity cases with the same structure and seriousness that legal scholars analyze on the Game-Changing Attorney podcast or discuss in episodes of the Divorce Course podcast. Behind every legal file, there is a human story that must be honored. Before the results are revealed, Judge Lake reflects on everything presented in the evidence stage. She considers Miss Davis's foster care upbringing, the deep abandonment scars she carries, and the emotional burden she tries to prevent her child from inheriting. She considers Mr. Smith's resistance, his confusion, his mixed motives, and his unresolved grief over losing his own father. The courtroom has witnessed a collision of wounds, hers from a lifetime of instability, and his from childhood loss and adult uncertainty. In cases like these, Judge Lake recognizes the patterns. They mirror the kinds of emotional journeys found in long-form human stories, like those on Celebrate Recovery testimonies or in realistic adoption stories full episodes, where individuals confront their mistakes hoping to rewrite their futures. Even though this is a paternity case, the emotional architecture carries similar themes: pain, revelation, fear, surrender, and transformation. Miss Davis stands in the courtroom wanting closure. Her heart is tied to the outcome because she wants her son to grow with answers, not with mysteries. Her belief in Mr. Smith's paternity has been built through elimination. Father number 1 eliminated, father number 3 eliminated, and a complete inability to locate father number 4. Although the timeline suggested Mr. Smith was a strong candidate, Judge Lake reminds everyone that biological truth cannot be predicted through emotional reasoning. Mr. Smith, on the other hand, stands with an inner conflict that is impossible to hide. He entered the courtroom defensive, doubting and suspicious of Miss Davis's motives. But as the questioning unfolded, his humanity slipped through the cracks. His confession about losing his father as a child revealed the psychological pressure he carried, a desire to avoid being hurt by unexpected responsibility, but also a fear of repeating the pattern of absence he experienced. This duality is something Judge Lake sees often: fathers who fear fatherhood not because they don't care, but because they don't know how to navigate emotional uncertainty. The audience in the courtroom may witness the tension, but only Judge Lake understands the legal weight behind these testimonies. Her understanding reflects the deep foundation of jurisprudence, the philosophical structure that shapes the concept of justice. In judicial philosophy, justice is not simply the enforcement of rules. It is the alignment of truth, accountability, and human dignity. Paternity cases embody this intersection perfectly. A child's identity is not just emotional. It is a legal status that dictates access to support, inheritance, medical history, and parental rights. This is why Judge Lake treats the situation as more than a personal conflict. She sees it as the legal system's responsibility to protect the child's future. In some situations, the Supreme Court has ruled on paternity matters and child support, reinforcing that legal fatherhood carries enforceable responsibilities. Judge Lake channels that same seriousness. She does not allow emotional chaos to overshadow the requirements of law. As she opens the envelope, the courtroom remains frozen. Miss Davis braces herself, her entire body tightening as she prepares for either relief or devastation. Mr. Smith watches with cautious anticipation, aware that this moment could redefine his life entirely. Judge Lake reads the results, and the truth lands like a stone in still water. Mr. Smith is not the biological father. The reaction is immediate. Miss Davis collapses emotionally under the weight of disappointment and embarrassment. She believed with her whole heart that Mr. Smith was the answer, that her past mistakes were finally leading her toward clarity. But instead, she is confronted with a deeper truth. The father she has been searching for is the one man she cannot find, a man whose name she cannot remember. Judge Lake takes a moment before responding. She knows that this truth is not merely a biological revelation, it is a psychological blow. For Miss Davis, this result forces her to revisit the emotional chaos she lived through and to face the reality that her son's father may remain unknown indefinitely. This is where legal truth and emotional truth collide. Judge Lake acknowledges the difficulty but reminds Miss Davis that avoiding the truth does not protect the child. It only extends uncertainty. She urges her to gather whatever information she can about the fourth man, even if the details seem impossible to recover. Mr. Smith is unexpectedly shaken. Even though he doubted his paternity, he still experiences a painful sense of loss. Judge Lake recognizes this emotional contradiction. It is common for men who enter her courtroom claiming they don't care, only to discover that they had quietly built hope in the background. His emotional reaction showcases the complexity of human attachment, a reminder that truth affects people differently than their expectations. Judge Lake, however, does not allow the emotional whirlpool to distract from the legal obligations ahead. She shifts the conversation toward responsibility and next steps. She tells Mr. Smith that he is legally free from paternity obligations, but she acknowledges the disappointment she sees on his face. She also reinforces that Miss Davis must now confront the challenge of identifying the missing father. This is not to shame her, but to emphasize the child's right to identity. The adverse inference in evidence law, which sometimes allows courts to draw conclusions when a party withholds information, is not directly applied here, but Judge Lake uses the principle to illustrate the importance of transparency. Miss Davis listens, deeply wounded but receptive. She knows that her journey does not end here. She will return to her search, not because the legal system requires it, but because her conscience does. Her son deserves answers. In Judge Lake's courtroom, truth is not the end. It is the beginning of responsibility. This outcome reflects a recurring theme discussed on legal and emotional recovery platforms. Truth changes everything. Whether in podcasts, testimony programs, or rehabilitation platforms, the message remains consistent. Truth may be painful, but it clears the path for healing. Judge Lake closes the case with that exact philosophy. She reminds both parties that mistakes may have brought them here, but truth will guide them forward. As the courtroom empties, the emotional weight lingers. Miss Davis prepares to meet privately with Judge Lake, seeking guidance on how to move forward. Mr. Smith leaves with mixed emotions, uncertain of what to feel now that the truth he expected still hits harder than imagined. And Judge Lake, always steady, moves on to the next case, bringing with her the same commitment to justice, evidence, and the child's best interest. In her courtroom, accountability and empathy coexist. Law and truth walk side by side, and every person who stands before her learns that the legal system, when guided by integrity, does not just deliver rulings, it delivers transformation.